All right, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. So I wanted to talk a little bit about light table. We actually, maybe it was it our third or fourth meeting or so, was that we showed the early preview version of light table. It's kind of an exciting thing. It's like, okay, there's a lot of potential here, but when we tried it out, there wasn't a whole lot to it. But now in this last month or two, light table's gotten to the point where you can actually use it, right? And you can use it. Some people are using it for their day-to-day programming. As an Emacs user, I find the editing almost laughably simplistic for like real hardcore day-to-day use. But for a casual side project or other things, or just as a learning tool, it's really nice. And I do use it for Clojure script at work now because it has the best Clojure script REPL. So I do I do the Clojure side in Emacs, I do the Clojure script side in light table now, and it's working. Despite the fact that it's not, it doesn't meet my strict standards for editing. It's pretty cool.
That being said, it's recently dropped as open source, so all the sources out there. So if you want to help cure Norman's problem, right?
No, I don't think source code is going to cure any of my problems.
But yeah, that might be a great thing to jump on and learn some more Clojure and Clojure script and help extend the editor for the things like people like Norman or Emacs snobs.
Well, my primary complaint is the lack of strict editing. So it's got a sort of, I'll show you, there's got sort of a pseudo par edit, which gives you a little bit of like a few of the par edit commands, but it's, without a strict mode that keeps you from ever having an unbalanced expression. I just, I find it almost impossible to code like that for anything non-trivial. But then again, I do my work Clojure script in it, but I just have to focus really hard and spend all my time balancing parentheses, which I think is a terrible way to edit.
Open source.
Yeah, no, and there are projects. So there are projects. There are people working on this, and that's why I'm showing it. And I think that's kind of interesting. And I think if you're a beginner or you're working on a side project or you just need something you want to get up quick and play with it, it's pretty cool. So what do we have in here? So this is light table here. You come up and and light table itself is actually written in Clojure script. So it's a Java, compiled down to JavaScript, and it runs there. So you've actually got a pretty when you think about when you see what's going on, it's a pretty impressive application. So what you've got here is you've got a basic environment and you've got a set of tabs here, and then you've got actions that you can do. If I hit Control Space in here, you get to the commands list. So I could do something, so I could hit Control Space, and if you don't know the commands, you can actually go through them. So I might I do something like I might type insta REPL. Maybe I don't remember the keystroke for starting an insta REPL. So I come over here and load the insta REPL and and then Clojure insta REPL. And the insta REPL is what we saw last time we looked at light table. It's basically the environment that lets you type a. We saw last time we looked at.
Sorry about that.
No problem.
It's basically the environment that lets you type a.
All right, so this is here and that is about 10 seconds behind. Is just 3 minutes.
By the way, if it's the first time you run the inst REPL, I don't know whether you notice down in the bottom it'll fetch dependencies. Sometimes that takes a little while, so give it a little bit.
Yeah, that's why I stalled there. I found whenever there's a little little progress thing, you got to give it a second, and you'll get the best experience. So the insta REPL is that the idea here is that it's sort of like a REPL. So what do you do in a REPL? You type expressions and you get things back. So I might say, right? I might type an expression just like in a REPL. You get a response back. I might. I might type expressions and get things back. So what's the difference between this and a regular REPL? Well, the insta REPL is interesting because if you change a value, all of your expressions get reevaluated. So let's say I said def and 100. I do 100, and I say +1 of n. I'm gonna get 101. But if I come back up here and change n to 120, then you see all of the expressions get reevaluated, and it's pretty cool. It's a pretty cool way to code. And I thought we might, since we have a little bit of time, I thought we might try a little group coding thing just to see how it works. So pull up a little for Clojure problem here. What's an interesting one here? Here's one. So here's Pascal's trapezoid. Yeah. So this is a pretty simple one. So this is kind of what I showed last time of how we did it. So what I actually did last time is you can actually take these expressions here, and I'm going to plug them right in. So if you're familiar with for Clojure, you basically have to create an expression that lives wherever that double underscore is. It's complaining there's no double underscore. So you have to create an expression that does that. So I'm just going to create, and as soon as I define that, right? So I def underscore identity, which is the function that returns itself, and then all of these things, take the input and return the output, and all of the tests they have false values, right? So what's I don't know if anybody has, and you can see this is my solution. This was back when I first started learning Clojure, and it's a very poor solution. So I should update that. It's not a terribly great solution, but it was when I was learning. So what's the idea? The idea is that you would take them, and it's probably not very big, huh? Is that you take the you take the first number and you add it to the second number. So 2, then 2 plus 3, and 3 plus 2 is 5, and 2 and the idea is that you return an infinite sequence of this, right? So how might we work through this? Well, we might create a function that says next row if we have some numbers, right? And then we don't know exactly what next row. You wouldn't know how to implement that, but and then we'll just iterate over that. Def in iterate next row. All right, so here we're just returning the same row over and over. You can see as you go through here, you can actually see this is showing the results of your last expression, and it's showing as you go through. So how might we implement next row? To take something to go from like 2, 3, 2, and you want to make that 2, 5, 5, 2, right? How do we implement that? Well. So my solution is basically to use partition. So partition is an interesting function. So partition. And it's like, okay, well maybe I don't remember how partition works. So I pull up the documentation here. So partition to. So if I have a sequence, let's say I have 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. And it partitions it into groups of 2, right? Well, if you can also give it a step. So if we give it a step of, say partition 2, 1, now I get 2, 4, 4, 6, 6, 8, 8, 10, and I can, you can kind of go through just like you would do at the REPL, right? Except for here, it's sort of all live interactive feedback. So if I take that and if I were to say put a 0 on the front and the end of this. And then you would see, like, if this were the next row, all I would have to do is add up each one of these, and then I would have, the result of the next row of the table. So that's what I'm going to do here.
So how did you pull up the documentation?
So this is
Control D.
Yeah, Control Shift D. No.
Shift K.
You have the cursor on the finger to undo it as well.
There we go. Yeah, I get this key, like this sort of, I'm really bad about this, is I know what my fingers do, and then if I think about it, I can't.
So what was it?
Control D.
Control D.
Yeah, Control T brings up the documentation. and then makes it go away.
Same thing. Go away.
Yeah.
Or you can right click on it, on the actual text, and choose remove article.
Oh, hey, yes you can. There you go. Sam, good call there. Show docs. That might be
Mouse user.
yeah, Mac user. All right. So what I'm going to do is I'll actually create an expression here so I can just test this out. Next row of
Control click on
232.
it. Make sure to say show docs.
It's probably- Wrong number. Oh, you. Okay. Is it spelled right? Well, you don't even have the show docs on there. All right. Well, I'll let Sam debug that one. All right. So I'll take so just to show you, then I'll partition.
Yeah. When that finishes, you should have it.
And if you right click, you see it.
Your video cable's coming in.
Oh, is it coming out? Well, okay. So I don't want to spend too much time on this. I should have.
Here it comes.
Abstract modern art.
Yeah.
NSA's having trouble syncing tonight.
Yeah.
There it is. Cool.
Yeah. So. I keep hitting save here. All right. All right. So this is the function I just coded it up real quickly in a sloppy way just to move us forward. So I've got kind of a solution here, and I see the first test case down here is true, second test is true, third case is true, but the third one I've got an arithmetic exception. And one of the interesting things about this is, these results you can actually expand in and look down at it. And if I look down at it and I see I've got an integer overflow and I see I've got these big values, I think, oh, okay, yeah, I should have used the big nums. So yeah, the plus with the quote to do the arbitrary precision arithmetic, and then all of the tests, all of the cases pass. So I do a lot of REPL stuff, and when I first saw a light table, I thought this really seems like an interesting way, because I'm always like putting a bunch of expressions into my REPL, and I'm like, back, reevaluate, back, reevaluate, or something like that. And this is sort of a nice lightweight way to like encapsulate a set of things you're working on at a given time. And then you can be done with it. Now, what's interesting about this is like it's sort of a nice middle ground, because you think, okay, well, why, if you have all this stuff, why don't you save it off, right? Well, you could say you kind of could save it off before, but sometimes you don't always want to do that. But with the InstaREPL, you can actually put a couple of these in your project and use them sort of like an IPython notebook or something, right? You can sort of have this thing, and you can just have these little environments set up where you have some things you want to some things you want to interact with and play with. It's not quite a test, right? So there's a time and place to write test cases, but sometimes you just want to have a little environment where you're playing with something. So I found the InstaREPL pretty interesting before, and this was sort of the functionality it had before, but it was not quite wasn't quite this robust or functional. But this is what we had before. So I want to move forward and say, well, what are some of the things you can do now? So I'm going to close off the InstaREPL.
While he's closing, I want to add something. If you can show this to your Ruby buddies who are always taunting and they don't know what Clojure can do, they have nothing this good, right? Nothing that can do that inline, in place, where you can try stuff that instantly. So, taunt back.
And so I was going to get to this later, but there is actually a Ruby Insta-REPL. I haven't tried it out to see how well it works, but somebody's tried to take this into the Ruby environment. So this is actually a multilingual tool. It does Clojure, it does Clojure script, it does Python. The Ruby stuff is actually outside. It's contributed by something else, and then JavaScript and HTML. So just as an example, if I were to So if I can, now this is not an Insta-REPL, it's just sort of a mode, but I can actually come in here and do Python or other languages. The difference is these aren't Insta-REPL modes. This is like the normal development mode, which is what I'm about to show for the other languages. But just to show you, like there's a lot of fun stuff you can do in here.
So since it's not an Insta-REPL, how was it evaluating?
I hit command enter, or I think on the, well, you guys are command enter. Yeah, so you type an expression and
but there was some keystroke you
yeah.
Tells it to evaluate.
Let me pull it up again. Yeah, so command enter is always always what you say. You say take this thing and evaluate it in the current context. When you see with the Clojure stuff, I'll show you in a minute, the Clojure script, we can actually interact, we'll be actually able to like redefine methods live into a running web page, for example. This is a Python, and it's just going out to a slave Python process and keeping it running. But we got some good stuff coming. So I want to open a project, so I'm going to open a recent workspace, and I'm going to come over here to DOM demo, which is kind of what this is the project I put together for the lightning talk last month. So I'm actually just going to go through this, but I'm going to go through it in Lighttable. So I open the project, and this thing over here is your project side. So you come, just like a normal IDE. I have this bound. This is actually something I've changed for myself. I have it bound to Command-Shift-T, because that was something that somebody had recommended. All right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come up here and I'm going to open something. I'm going to open first.html. And I got an HTML file. So now I want to look at this HTML file. I hit Command Enter, just like I would evaluate Python. I'm evaluating the HTML. So HTML actually opens up here into a new internal browser. So this is actually a full web browser running managed inside of the Lighttable environment. And let me see if if I've got enough room here to do this. So I create a little tab set. Okay, that's probably okay. So the interesting thing here is I can actually, now I've got a live environment, and if I make a change over here to my code, I can reevaluate it, or that's probably not,
Nice. You showed up on the tab.
Yeah. Right, so I can so I can interact with it, and okay, so then nothing too special about here. You got live HTML all over the place. So in this HTML is I've got this JavaScript file, so I'm actually going to open up that JavaScript file now here, and this is the JavaScript file inside of here. So what this is part of the demo, and I've got two little functions here: add box and update all. Add box will add some number of boxes, right? When I press on the box, it puts a random number in the a random number between 1 and 6 into the box, right? And update all, updates all of the boxes. So not a very exciting. Oh, sorry, that's between 1 and 2. Okay, well here's a good example. So I have this code over here, and it was random number between 1 and 2, right? And I was like, okay, I want to change this, so I want to change it to 6. And I come over here and I Command Enter, and it takes the JavaScript, sends it to the browser, and now inside the browser, you see they're all range 1 to 6. Or if I change this to 600, and I send the function back to the page, it's all inside of here. So I'm actually able to come up and work with this directly. What's even more interesting here is if I close this off,
So is it only updating that one function that you just
Yes,
modified?
there's one that I had that has the check mark is what I updated. And I can actually send arbitrary commands over there. So for instance, if I type some number, and I hit Command Enter, I hit it a few times, and it's evaluating and giving me the results here next to it each time, right? If I were to call, I could call this function down here, make box is what gets called. So if I call make box, and you see it's adding, live. So I'm actually interacting. So it's just like you're at your JavaScript console in your browser, but you've actually got a functional environment, right? What's the bad thing about your console, the JavaScript console? It's just, you can't do anything with it. You can type it, you've got very limited capabilities. And of course, I can do things like, if I type document, it'll give you all, it'll give you your normal JavaScript, the inspector you would expect to get there. So it's kind of a cool environment for going in. Now you can't do there are things you can do in your browser debugger, in your browser console, like debug and other things that aren't integrated into Lighttable yet. So there's definitely some features in here that are not as powerful. Although I will say, if there is a secret command, dev oh man, I can't remember what it is. So secret, I forgot what it is. Dev inspector. There we go. And somewhere over here. Where is it? There we go. Is your normal inspector, so you can actually do some of the stuff that you would expect to be able to do in a regular web browser. But that's sort of like that's you're sort of stepping outside of the environment there for that.
So is that using like a Chromium?
I actually, Dar asked the same thing before to me. I actually forgot. I don't actually remember what it is. It looks like Chrome to me.
It's the DevTools part.
It's built on top of Node WebKit.
Okay.
Which is Node.js and the V8
Gotcha.
engine crammed together. So yeah, it is Chrome.
All right. So I'm going to close this for a second and show you one more thing. And I'm going to close this tab set so I get a little more screen on. So another thing I can do, I just opened it in a browser here, but I can actually open this in externally. So I'll come over here, add connection, and I'm going to say browser external. And I don't know, the rest of these little messages I can't resize, or at least I don't know how to resize them yet, but it's giving me this little script block. So I've actually put this into my file here, and then open this in my web browser over here. Where's my Lighttable? So you can see down here at the bottom. I hope you can see down here. It says connected. It said connected to the browser. So I'm actually live inside of the application here. So if I change something in it, right, I'm doing the same things I was doing, but it's actually connected out to the external browser, right? And the same thing is true for the code here. So if I just right, I get the alert outside in my external browser. So I'm actually able to connect in to an external environment. So you're not, all the tools that it's giving you, it's not limited to that internal browser, right? All right, so I will take that out. So this is JavaScript, and I put this demo together here. This is to show you, because I'm going to show you the same thing, more or less in Clojure script, and I just wanted a point of comparison with JavaScript. So this is the way I've put together this particular silly little example here. I use a jQuery. I add the clicks. I do DOM manipulation with I do the lookups with the $, standard jQuery. And then I use these jQuery creation, DOM creation, .adder, .data, all of these normal things to do this. So if you understand JavaScript, it should make a lot of sense here. Oh, I did want to show one thing here, just to as an example, because I thought that I was thinking about this, and there's a common problem when I find people in Clojure when they first start learning to interact with the REPL, is they'll actually redefine a function, and then they'll go back to their app, and they'll send it to the REPL, they'll redefine it, and their app, they don't see a change in functionality, right? So and I wanted to demonstrate that in JavaScript to show you the same behavior, because it's that sort of when I thought about it that way, it suddenly sort of made a little bit more sense why this happens. So I'm going to open the connect bar. Okay, so should not be connected here. So I'm going to open this in the browser. There we go. Oh, hold up. I need to take this script out here. There we go. Okay, so, and then go back to the tab set. Okay, so I'm over here adding boxes, and you see over here I add the span that has the dash, and I say the unique ID is box 0 or box 1. I use a little Clojure to keep that in sync. So let's say we wanted to change that, and we wanted this to be capitals, right? So I just told you I just told you like over here, if I change this to 100, right, then or 10. And send that over, and I start calling these things. I'm going to get numbers in the range. Oh, sorry. Yeah. Oh, sorry. Let me disconnect all of these. Start over here. There we go. So I've got the little spinny thing. So this is the downside of light table, is it's very easy to get in this little spinny state. It's still very much a beta project. So I'm just going to exit out completely here to save some time. And I don't know how much of that is light table and how much of it is me, but the combination seems to produce a lot of spinny things. I don't know what to call them. They're little blocks. I don't know if there's a name. If anybody has a good name. Because they're not really spinning, it's
2D Rubik's Cube.
Yeah. All right.
Square.
That's good. Just going around the block. Totally cube.
There, yeah. Okay, so here I am in the app, and so I can add a few, and I've got the updates because I just reloaded the page, so that's no fun. But so what I was saying is, like, if I come over here and change one of these things, like the number, I change it to 100. Clearly that makes a difference immediately in the page. But there's other things. So if I come down here, if I change this box, I say, okay, we actually didn't want it uppercase, we wanted it mixed case. And I come over here and evaluate. Okay, so I've got a new make box. I've sent make box over here, right? If I call make box, right, it clearly gets the right functionality, right? It calls that method. But when I call add box, I get the old one. So why is that? Well, I was thinking about this today, and I actually had this. I was actually preparing for this, and I was like, imagine that. And I was like, why is this happening? I'm like, this is exactly the same thing that happens to me and happens to a lot of people I see at the REPL. So if you look down here, this function, this onReady, I've added the click and said .click make box, right? Well, think about it. What happens at the time that's evaluated, the value of make box, that function, right, is actually passed in as the click handler. So that's at that time it's a value, right? So that's not what. And you get the same thing in Clojure. If you pass something a function, that var gets evaluated, and then it's just a function, right? You're no longer passing that around. So how do you deal with this in Clojure? Well, in Clojure, you deal with it by making it a var reference. So that's not going to make any sense in JavaScript. But a var reference is pass the var along, pass the name, don't pass the actual function value, because a var implements ifun, and then you invoke a function on a var, and it looks up the value from the namespace, and you're all good. So how do you do this in JavaScript? Well, I had to do a function. Sorry, not fn, function, and I had to call make box, right? And when you put it inside of the function, when you have it like that, then you're passing the function that has a reference to the make box, and it actually looks up, each time it evaluates, looks up make box from the environment. Now to get this click function here, I'm going to have to actually reload the page here to get the onreadies to work. But now I add box, and if I just make a change here, put a bunch of dashes in there, and I re-get that, and now all the things are updated live. So I don't know if that's helpful. I found that sort of like interesting just to kind of match up my experience. And as soon as I did that, it really things just sort of like whenever I can make those connections between languages and the way evaluation and the way things work, things sort of click for me. So I don't know if that was interesting or not, but this happens. So a couple months ago when we were talking about the ring handlers, and when you start up a ring, you start up a ring and you pass it in a middleware, right? If you pass it in as a function, if you pass in the var, that gets evaluated, and then a function passes in, and then no matter what you change in the function in the REPL, that middleware doesn't change, right? That doesn't change. But if you pass in the var, right, then it will you can update the function live. All right, so this is enough JavaScript. We're not the JavaScript meetup. So I wanted to show, to finish up my portion of this, and get on to...
You realize that was strong typing.
Sure. If by strong typing you mean something, just anything Sam doesn't like?
I'll go with that.
Taco Bell, strong typing. All right, so now I've got a second page here, and I'm using I'm going to do the same app in ClojureScript, and I'm going to show you the ClojureScript integration, and at the same time show you DOMI. So we've got a second.html here, and it's it looks a lot structurally it's a lot like the first app. The only difference is instead of calling first.js, it's called second.js, and second.js is compiled from the ClojureScript here, and there are I actually stopped a good thing. I've actually got a line build auto here, so if I make any changes, that JavaScript will get updated. Standard ClojureScript stuff. Now it works the same way. If I hit add box, now I've named it a little bit differently here. You'll notice if you've been doing Clojure a while, you'll notice that double underscore, and you'll say you're using GenSim, and so I am actually doing that here just to keep a unique ID, but it's basically doing the same thing I did here. So what's really interesting here is I've been doing ClojureScript at work. I really get frustrated by ClojureScript because the REPL tools for ClojureScript are really, really bad in my opinion. You've got the browser REPL, right? The browser REPL lets you run something that looks a lot like what we're doing here, except for you've got a little browser REPL that's outside of it, and you can interact with your ClojureScript in a web browser, but that's not connected up to any tool. So all you have is sort of this command line environment, and so you can't really send a function to it. You can copy a function from your source code over to the REPL and put it in the namespace and send it over. You can do all this stuff manually, but this is just sort of it's really, really awkward. It works in an emergency, but it's not this pleasant environment that you're used to working with Clojure. And then recently there is Chaz Emmert's Austin, and it's like you look at Austin and it's like this is the greatest thing ever. It's and I showed this Austin like 3 or 4 meetings ago. It was really nice, except for the fact that it just hardly even worked, and it spun, took CPU up to 100%. It was just a mess of a tool.
REPL, right?
Yeah, and it was an NREPL that you could use anywhere you would use an NREPL. So from your Emacs or from your IntelliJ or from any NREPL environment, you could connect into it, and it worked, but it kind of overlaid your regular REPL, and it was really just a pain to use. And I don't know what I saw you were using. I don't know if you had a better experience with it yet, but I've just. In my opinion, Austin is one of those things that's just like what's that? With RITs, the debugger. It's like something that I've only ever seen anybody use successfully in a demo at a Clojure conference. I've never actually seen anybody use RITs or Austin in a real environment. If anybody has, I would like to know, but I've not managed to do it. So when I saw this here, I was like, okay, I got to give this a try. So here I've got this little environment. So I've got here, and I come over here, and I'm gonna go into my Clojure script source, hit Command Enter. You see I've got Spinny, but this is not hopefully not a bad Spinny. It actually has to, because it's going through your Clojure project, it actually has to go in and find all your Clojure script dependencies and make sure everything's updated so that it can do it. But it managed to connect, so that's really good. I've got it, and it says function some number, so okay, that's pretty good. So I'll try this again, let's just call the function then. Oh, hey, and it actually works. And the interesting thing is this is actually compiling this expression using the Clojure script compiler, putting it in here, sending it to the browser. It's evaluating in the browser context, and then bringing the result back exactly what you would want. So if I were to update this function here, just like we did before, right? Right, and now I update all, right? I get to, all the number, I get random numbers from 1 to 600. So this is really, really good because now I can actually get the same development environment I'm used to. So as I'm coming in, if I want to make changes to something, I can just come in and make the changes, and I can interact with my live application, right? And this is, to me, this is the essence of Clojure development, is to be at the REPL, you have a live application, and you can change your function definitions out from underneath you without losing any of your environment, without losing anything you've been set up with. You can just send your stuff in, and it actually just works, which is, as someone who's been doing Clojure script professionally for quite a while now, the ability to actually work, treat this browser as something that's as good as your regular environment is just great. So that's pretty much it. If I create a new, and I can also interact. By the way, obviously, if I do JSS document, I get the document, right. If I can, you can call. Right, you can do all of your JavaScript, everything as if you were in the browser. I could take this out, I could connect it to the browser, I could put it in just like I showed you before with the JavaScript, I can put that out in my Chrome or my Safari, and I can interact with it the exact same way. So I find that pretty impressive. I'll kind of stop the light table there's a newer version of light table. Let's don't install it in the middle of the presentation. I'm pretty sure nothing could go wrong, but
Only goes wrong once.
yeah, exactly. I'm pretty sure it's safe to update your tools in the middle of a presentation, but just on the off chance it's not. All right, so given that we've done that, I actually want to jump into the code here and show what's going on here, just to show you some of the DOM manipulation tools, because I've kind of basically just tried to recreate that jQuery that I had just shown you. And you can use jQuery in ClojureScript. In fact, this is what we used at work for quite some time with JQ as a wrapper for jQuery. And it wraps it just to give it, because some of the jQuery stuff, it's pretty nice for JavaScript. So you kind of get this idiom, it sort of has this good JavaScript feel, but it doesn't really translate to ClojureScript. So there's JQ, which kind of takes jQuery and just wraps it with a little bit of extra stuff that lets it feel comfortable from a ClojureScript environment. But the general consensus is that that's really, even with this extra stuff, jQuery is just really not a beautiful fit. It's just like even if you wrap the stuff in jQuery, it's sort of a leaky abstraction, I guess. It really just doesn't feel very Clojure scripty. So the tools that we're going to show you tonight, I'm going to show you Domi, and Dar's going to show you Domina. And those tools have a little bit more of a feel. So I just want to show you how to do with these tools, how they think about it, and how to accomplish the same kind of tasks. So, and for comparison, I will open up the JavaScript, because I basically tried to copy, I tried to faithfully copy what was happening, but not, was trying to be, reasonably idiomatic in both environments. I may have, I may not have succeeded entirely, but I think we're pretty close. So in jQuery, you usually start off everything with a ready function, something that starts it up. And this, in this case, I've dynamically set the title of the page, and I've added click handlers to the add box and to the update all classes. So how do we do this in DOMI? By the way, of course, I've required DOMI, and I've brought in a couple macros here: node, select, and I'll show you these as we go. But there's a little bit of importing you do as with any Clojure application. So with DOMI's a little bit more verbose in some places than jQuery. But the advantage of doing it this way is that you can build these up in a little bit nicer of a way, but I don't really have a larger example here. But the reason we switched from JQ to DOMI at work was because as you get larger, as you get richer functionality, DOMI sort of the idiom, it sort of expands into a way that's very pleasant, whereas the jQuery stuff really doesn't. At least when accessed from Clojure script, do not really grow well with your application here. So, to set the title here, Clojure script, I select the title. So I select the h1.title, so the h1 whose class is title, and I call set text on it. And notice all of these have these nice exclamation points, because these are these are destructive operations. They mutate the DOM. So all of this stuff is nicely separated, the functional and the dysfunctional sides of it. So set it to Clojure script. Then I select the add box, and I call listen with a click handler of make box, and I listen for the click event update all on the update all button, exactly like the jQuery. Now this, if you're looking at this and you're thinking, well, that's sort of weird, that doesn't quite look right. That's because these are primarily made to chain together, using the threading macros like this. So what you would normally, because normally you'd be doing a little bit more, so normally you would do something like this, select one, so select one node whose class is add box. And the way that you do selections here, and that is at the bottom, so let me raise this up so it's a little more visible. So the way you do selections on here is you give it a keyword, and then you put your selector, your selector context. So in jQuery, you might say .add box, right? Here, I'm going to turn that into a keyword. You can use the string syntax too, but because it's a little bit, because it looks a little bit more like what Hiccup and Crate and these other guys do. That's sort of the standard, for Clojure web apps. So I'd normally thread that through, and I would say on that I would take the action, DOMI listen. Right. So all of the DOMI stuff fits this threading style. I haven't done it here just to because I know some people get a little confused by that. I think I use it in one or two places up above. But that's sort of the idea, is that you take this stuff, you select elements, and then instead of chaining them like a jQuery would, you would thread them through the thread macro, and do things. So I might set a text value and then add the click handler, or do something like that, right?
That's a good point, because if you don't thread it, then it's not really more concise than just calling the JavaScript from Clojure. Something I noticed about Domino is a lot of times it was simpler just to call JavaScript.
Well, yeah, and also it's really easy to extend this. So this listen, you might turn this into another function, right? And so you can sort of build your abstractions, and with jQuery to build those abstractions, I mean, you still do it. I mean, there are still patterns to do it, but you kind of have to. In my feeling is you just kind of have to jump through some hoops that feel like, I don't know, not quite as natural. Whereas this could just be because because I'm so comfortable with the Clojure idioms. But making abstractions on top of this to take a sequence of things and work with them in this way, it seems to make a lot of sense to me, at least. Yeah, you're right. If you look at this and you look at this, maybe that's not yeah. You look at the syntax and that's maybe not a huge advantage there. All right, so now make box. So we look at one of these. So we look at make box, and make box. So what I do is I select the body, and again, the normal pattern here would be to put this in a threading. So I say select the body and then append the box template with an ID, just like the JavaScript. In the JavaScript, I did do it a little bit differently. Here, I kept the var in a closure. I made a closure and put the var in the closure, and you have this little mutable state. In this case, I've just used gensim, and I can sort of pretend like there's no state there, even though obviously there is. So I append, and then here I'm creating a template. So in jQuery, the way I created the elements, and yes, there are other ways to create elements in jQuery, but I've created the elements by just using this syntax for all of the static data, and then using adder or data, these things over here for things that were dynamic values, because you have this problem of injection, right? So you put all create all your static stuff, and then set your dynamic values in programmatically, and that's a safe way to do things. And the way you do this with Nami, there's actually two ways. You can call the node function, which will create a node, or you can create a template, which sort of does this automatically. So the box template up here. Box template it has 3 elements. It uses the box for template, uses the click me button template, and then it just creates this BR node, right? Because there's no need to create a template just for BR. And this is doing exactly the same thing as this guy. So here I'm creating a new box, I'm creating a new button, and I'm creating a BR, right? Well, in the Clojure script, I am creating the first button, creating the second button, and then or creating the span, creating the button, and then creating the BR, right? So how does this work? So if I call, the interesting thing here is if I call box for, so and this is sort of the nice thing about the environment is I can actually look at some of this stuff, right? I can say, okay, I've got that HTML span element, and I can go in, I can go in and interact with this. I could actually take that element, I could put it in the DOM, I can, and so all it's doing is taking this. So the general idea is that just like with Hiccup, if I wanted an H1, I would create a vector with an H1 and then the body inside of it, right? Which could be anything, right? So here I'm creating a span. I give it an attribute ID, a box ID, and here's the internal content. So that is this guy over here. I create a button. So button whose class is click me. Type is button. It has the uses HTML5 data, and then puts the box ID in here, which is the gensim, right? And I just put it up and insert it into the document. And the same thing. I think the idea is probably relatively straightforward. It's just the idea is that you're attaching click handlers or any kind of event handlers, you're creating new elements, you're inserting them into documents, you're interacting with it exactly the same way as you would with any other DOM manipulation tool, except for you're doing it in Clojure here. So I will, in the interest of time and keeping everybody sane, I'll let Dar actually show an interesting DOM manipulation example, or at least an interesting and attractive one. I think you'll agree that my web styling here leaves it to be lacks a bit. So anyways, I encourage you to check out Lighttable. If you want to get started with Clojure and you come to one of our hack days, just load up Lighttable. I think it's a really, really easy environment. I didn't actually show you any Clojure. I only showed you Clojure script and Python and JavaScript and everything, but it actually is a Clojure environment too. Well, I guess we did it in the Insta REPL. But you can pretty much do any sort of hacking for personal projects, or and like I said, some people are using it for production work. So you can do quite a bit with it, and it's just so easy to get started. I can't think of any of the other tools that are that easy to get going with.
One of the things just to add to Norman's deal is because it's written in Clojure script, everything he did show you in the Clojure script, if you look at how to create simple plugins for light table, which are just Clojure script plugins, you can do all that evaluation right in the environment as you're extending it. So it's like a first-class environment in that sense. You can extend the environment as you're using it to extend it. And I think that's a real growth opportunity for all Clojure programmers, whether you're Clojure script or not. And that is like, no other environment gives you that right now in the Clojure space. So I think it's really cool.
Okay, so my talk's going to be on Domina, which is very similar to Domi, which Norman was just showing you. Just a quick review of what the DOM is. I know not everybody here does web development. You've probably all seen HTML. So if you imagined all of the tags in an HTML document as nodes in a hierarchy, the document object model basically gives you the ability to manipulate those nodes. I'm not going to use a whole lot of that manipulation ability because the application that I'm using here is a little bit more restricted than some of the stuff that Norman was showing you. But you could imagine, just scraping across any of these nodes using some sort of a selector type function going down from the root element to the body to a particular element that you want to get to. That's, I think, more typical of the kind of application you see for something like Domina. Okay, so there's 6 source files for Domina. The primary one is called Domina. And then there's some stuff that gets broken out into CSS, events, XPath, and support and macros. I'm just going to use Domina. These are all the methods that are available to you in that library. And the 2 that I'm going to be focusing on today are set style and by ID, which if you're really familiar with JavaScript is similar to get element by ID. Okay, so the problem that I ran into was that the Bootstrap Jumbotron, if you're familiar with Twitter's Bootstrap framework for developing web applications, there's like a main image that'll go on your screen that's called a Jumbotron. It doesn't maintain its aspect ratio at the very small sizes. So when you start to squeeze down to maybe a portrait view on an iPhone, what I'll find is that the image starts to get some extra buffering on the top and bottom. So I'll show you that right now. So this is my commercial application. I guess I should give you a quick plug on it. Next Nimbus is, well, Nimbus is Latin for cloud, of course, and next meaning new hotness, whatever. This is an environment to make cloud computing readily accessible to anyone who can drag and drop with a mouse. So we're going to basically remove all of the incidental complexity that comes with cloud computing, maybe depending on your UI, so that you'll have a very graphical environment to work with. So as you resize in this example, if you get down, you can see that at the larger sizes, the container object in Bootstrap sets a lower bound, and it just kind of jumps to that. So right now I'm at the large setting. When I drop down to medium, you see it jumps again. And if I go even smaller, now it's at the small setting, and then it'll go down to extra small. And this is where I start to run into the problem. This is probably about what the resolution would be on an iPhone. And you can see there's some extra space showing up as extra padding in this image. So we want to get rid of that. Okay, so Bootstrap has some responsive settings with something they call media queries. You can see in these first 2 examples that there's a minimum width, which is what it's jumping to. That's the lower bound that it's trying to stick to whenever you jump between the widths. And then when you get down to the extra small setting, all it has is a max. So there's no minimum to jump to. So what it does is it sets to that maximum. As you get smaller, it gets that extra buffer on there. Okay, and this is the code that I made to correct that issue. You just require Domina, and then I created a function to set the Jumbotron padding. In my case, rather than just scraping through the DOM hierarchy, I tagged the HTML tag with an ID of the HTML, and then from there I get the client width. If it's smaller than 768, which is extra small in Bootstrap, I take the aspect ratio of the image, which I know is 1080 by 1920s. That's what I work with. And then I just take the ratio of that and apply it to whatever the width is, and that's what the aspect ratio, the height of that item should be on my page. Next, I create a function to actually set the style using the Jumbotron padding, and then I add a listener. There are functions in Domina for adding event listeners. There's a separate event library. I had some issues with it, so I decided to just call JavaScript directly. Anytime you're using Clojure script, if you see a dot, it means it's a method call. And if you see a dot dash, it means it's a property or an attribute. So in this case, client width is just the width. It's not really a function. And then add event listener is actually doing something. So that's the method call. And then at the bottom, you can barely see this, but I'm just calling it on launch to make sure that if they happen to open in a small setting, it gets called to begin with. Okay, and then I'll show you what it looks like once you correct it. Okay, now we're down at the extra small setting. Any questions about that? Much shorter talks. Thank you.
So I'll add that I think that Domina is the more supported, better, kind of better, has a better future. So I showed Domina because that's what I'm familiar with, because that's what we switched to from JQ. But it seems like Domina is definitely what people are preferring now. So if you have your choice, take a look at Domina first. But the way you access is very similar.
It looks almost identical.
Yeah, it's very similar to Domina. If I could do it over, I would probably replace some stuff. But we're not having any problems with Domina, so no need yet.
Cool. Okay, so I'm going to talk about Liberator, which is basically a quick summary is if you're doing REST in Clojure, it's probably the simplest way for you to set up your REST APIs. It's pretty straightforward, and it's going to be a quick talk, but basically all you got to do is if you're using Lineagen, pull in Liberator, and your very first thing you can do, and it shows it here, the simplest thing you can do is define a resource. And then there's a function call for it. And then these particular keywords let you specify arguments that the resource creation is going to take, or handlers and actions to execute when a certain branch of the execution of the resource HTTP call occurs, right? So when you go to access this particular resource, if everything goes through and a 202 happens, it's going to return hello world, right? And it's going to return it in plain text, right? Where this hello world is, you can substitute a function call, or you can actually define an inline function and stuff like that. So the idea here is there's a decision graph that every basically every access through an HTTP resource is going to go through this decision graph. And I am going to pull this particular guy into.
And when you say resource, you mean the a REST resource, right?
Mm-hmm. Right. It's closing on it. This graph here, which I had open in another window a second ago. Anyway, I'm going to scroll it over here the hard way. So when you first start it says there's a resource available, and if you go true, you go down into this particular path. Does it know the method put, get, delete? Then it does some basic checks. URL too long? No. Is the method allowed? Right, and we'll see an example where you can specify that really super easy. Is it malformed? Is it authorized? Are you able to access this? And you can put functions to do all these particular things super nice and easy. Even if you are authorized, are you allowed? So you're authorized to access the service, but not this particular resource, right? So you can deal with that. Is the content header good? Is the content type they're asking for one that you know how to return, right? every one of these branch points is specifiable. And then it keeps going down, and these are normal kind of things you're going to compare. And I'm not going to show you the whole graph because the screen is so small, but it has the whole decision graph specified for doing HTTP REST calls for the resources. It also has some debugging options that make it really easy to trace the requests and what occurs in that decision graph. And so in this example, and I'm going to show you real code, I'm just going through the site real quick so you kind of have seen it before and it makes a lot more sense. But anyway, in this example, they have a counter, which is a basic atom, and they create a resource around that counter. They're going to return plain text as their media type. They'll accept gets or posts to the counter. And then if they access resolves to a 202, they're going to print out the counter value. And when they do a post, they're going to increment the counter value and swap that into the atom. So right here, they define a resource that says the available media types, what methods are allowed, specify 2 functions to handle 2 different scenarios, handle OK and post. So I don't know about you, but in some of the other toolkits I've used, like JAX-RS and stuff like that, specifying the same kind of thing is like a hell of a lot more code, and it's not as clean. So the way you get access to that resource is in your, if you're using Clojure or ring handlers, just in your route definition, all these liberator resources are also ring handlers, right? So you just pop it right in there as your ring handler for that particular URL path. And then in the case of this particular section, they use a piece of ringware that they created called wrap trace, and they wrap it around everything that's getting handled for their app. And they trace the header and the UI, right? Those 2 particular things. And then on the output here, we see the trace, and the decision is in that big graph that I was showing you parts of. You get to see all the decisions down that graph and whether it's true or false and what the value was. Like it's a known method. It was get, the URL wasn't too long. So you can look at that graph that they have on there and you can actually print it out. It's pretty big, right? But when you put the trace in here, you can see the whole thing and it makes it really easy to debug your resources. So then you see the counter gets updated, you see all the parameters there, and then you can do the trace UI thing, which is what I was telling you too, and it'll show you in your HTML page, you can see the same trace. And here you actually get to see the graph, and you get to see the highlight in green and the red choices of the path it took all the way down to your particular resolution down here, right? Which is really cool. So you see where it went down a no path, where it went down a true path on that big graph, right? So it's really awesome that way. And again, I'm just gonna pound it in. No other resource thing that I've played with before is this clean, right? And I played with the Ruby on Rails ones and the Java ones, and I looked at the Erlang ones, but then it was like, nah, I don't want to see that anymore. So I can't be biased enough that how much this is so much simpler than anything else, and it was so much more enjoyable to play with. I clicked on the wrong one. Content negotiation. It basically supports Eden, HTTP, or HTML, and JSON straight out of the box, but you can specify your own content output as well. But basically, you just tell it what the available media types are for your resource. And in your handle OK, you can decide based on what media type they requested, what to return, right? So it's completely functional. You have the data, you can decide which function to call to give them back what they want to.
What about like templating? Is there for like HTML?
You could use any templating tool from Clojure to template it out. Right, because it's just a function call, right? Sure. It supports right out of the box. Like the first time I used it, I didn't specify anything. I just put text And I got back in my browser, when I typed in the URL, it came back as HTML. So by default, it looks at the content type, and if you specified text plain first or text HTML, that's what it'll give you. If I had switched it and put text JSON first, the first thing that it knows about by default that it sees, if I would have put JSON first and then HTML, I would have gotten JSON response back the first time I hit it, right? But I was like, this is awesome. Straight out of the box, I get HTML, JSON, and Eden. I don't have to do anything else. And in my little simple world, I'm done. I don't have to write my own anymore, right? So it's like, woohoo, one more thing I don't have to do, right? Because I would consider myself the ultimate OO programmer. I'm just about gluing stuff, right? I'm like, you guys do all the hard work, I'm gonna glue it together. I spent years doing the hard work. Now it's my time to just use. I'm gonna be a user, right? So, and from this sense, the library makes a lot of sense to me, and that's why I love it so much. I don't have to think and know anything really about the spec. I look at the library and I see those little handlers, and I implement the handler for the situation I want. I tell it what content I want, and it was one of those tools that gave me what it said it was gonna, and it got out of my way, right? Because even when I first started playing with it and I was like making stupid mistakes, and I asked Norman to explain something to me, even then it was still simpler than anything else I had used, right? And so that was like a big bonus. So in this example, they're just showing you where they access some stuff and get different content types back, but it's still a pretty good example. Content negotiation, conditional requests. You could request things based on, was it modified last time or not, and it deals with the cache, basically, in your browser, right? So it's gonna do smart things about timing out the resource and requerying it and stuff like that. I haven't used that yet, but I read that section and I'm like, that's pretty cool, right? Most of the time, the stuff I'm like playing with, there's another database call, and so I have to do it anyway, because I always want the latest out of the database, and I don't push from the database up to the cache. So it's just a raw query and it doesn't really matter. E-tags, that's something, again, I haven't had to use, but Norman thought it was pretty cool when he first saw it. So I was like, okay, it must be semi-important. He's probably used it.
Helps with caching, external caching.
Okay. So when I very first did this, post was what I did first. The very first thing out of the box. And that was part of why it stuck with me so well. I posted something and it was like, it just worked, and I hadn't even asked Norman any questions yet. It was just like, because I don't spend a lot of time doing web stuff anymore, and it was just like, this is so nice and clean, right? And basically, if you look at this resource definition, you see the allowed methods, post and get, the content types we handle. Handle okay is if everything goes through that graph perfectly and you get a 2 of 2, right? And in this case, they just define a function that says they're going to return the string with the count, right, at post, right? Let me go back. If there's post colon, and again, notice they follow the standard Clojure format that put the bang if it modifies the state. They do the function, they do the standard do async thing, so it's transactional, right? And they update the post, right? And then they also define a redirect. So after they do the modification of the count variable and they modify context and state, then they turn around and redirect. And in Liberator's world, when you do a redirect, you just need to return either a concrete URL of where you're redirecting, or you return a hash, or a map, with the keyword location and the dynamic URL that's built up and set for that keyword. That's the pattern, right? It's literally that simple. Create your post bang, put your function in there for what you want to do when a post happens, and then if you want to redirect, either have a hard URL that it's going to redirect to as a string, or put a map that has the location keyword, and you can have more than that, but at a minimum, you have the location keyword with where you want it to go, right? And you follow those patterns and boom, you're going, right? So you can post, you can get, and we haven't even got to put and delete, which are even simpler than these two. Those are the like for me, it was a huge win. I'm like, this is the best, right? And then anyway, here's an example of the E tag. So you get your caching, I guess, down here with the E tag. So notice in this particular one, the post redirect, they do location, and then they're dynamically building that string by getting out of the request context. They get the ID and then do a format so it's substituted in for the %s, and they get a concrete URL there, right, for the location. So it's really nice and simple and clean. Here's a resource for a particular individual post box that they do. Again, allowed methods, available media type. In this particular case, they do an exist check to see if the resource exists. If it does, they can keep going. If it doesn't, they don't pass through this struct, right? They return nil. If it does exist, then they create this map and stick D into data, where D is the number of posts, basically, right? Because they parse int out of the context. I mean, you can read the regular Clojure code, but the context is basically the ring request. It comes through and they just pass it as context, right? And you can insert things into it or you can read things out of it. It's just a map, right?
It's actually a map that can, the request is one part of it. So it's like a superset. It's like
yeah, it's more than the request. That's
the request context is just one key inside of that.
And when I said request, I don't mean just your HTTP request. I'm thinking the full ring request, right? Where all the stuff's injected in, right? So you have a request object that's in this bigger context. So context is probably the better term to use. But as you get your original request into ring and then all the things get added onto it, that's what's passed through to you, right? So you can just add to it, remove from it, whatever. It's nice and clean. And the big deal here that I thought was cool, and Norman pointed this out, I didn't even pay attention to it, that's the pattern I was following. But when they stick this D into data in this return map, because they're working with data out of here, and that's what gets returned out of D from the result of this exist check, it's still in context here. And it's double colon namespace resolved. So you're returning data right there. And it got kind of set in the exist check for you. If it was set to nil, you'd return nil and handle okay. If it was set to whatever was in D for data, you'd get it, right? So again, they have, the other great thing is in the documentation, they show examples of everything being used. And it's exactly what you would query on the command line with your curl. There's an example of put. You can do conflict check and stuff like that. Doesn't really matter for our example, but basically everything together. Here's all the things it supports, which is basically everything the average person's using HTTP. You can list your resources. You get context. If it's malformed, remember up at the top of that graph, you can put in checks for that, right? Malformed, and you put a function, what do you want to do if it's malformed, right? So it's nice and clean that way. And in this example, they break them out into functions to handle each one of these scenarios. And then they set those function calls down in here to get used, right? So it's super clean. So that being said, I'm going to switch over to light table, which has gotten a lot smaller than I remember it. And light table doesn't actually play well with your screen shrinking. There we go. Okay, so in this particular thing, we have a demo, which is actually a Luminous project, because that's what I use to play with the web stuff. But basically, there's a couple of quick things I'll show you. There's a simple database that understands how to create users and create API keys and games. Because the example is we're a video games score service, and you can request the scores for your game or a particular game's information, right? And you have an API key that you've gotten assigned when you registered or something, right? So it's a real simple service. We got a real simple database around that and a relatively simple schema, okay? So there's 3 tables. Now, when you get in here, we can see the API right away. There's users. We can access users. And instead of having a separate function where we do def in and then we say resource, we just define it right in line in the route for any users. Takes a user in as the argument, and then we create the resource right in line, which was kind of nice. And then we set the allowed methods, the return types. Is it authorized? I.e., we're going to give it the key that we got when we signed up, and it's going to pass in there, and it's going to check that auth key, right? If everything goes okay, we're going to do a query to the database to get the users and just return them, right? Because it's automatically, because we said we want text HTML, it's going to use its auto formatter to format our result as HTML if we don't specify anything else on the request type. If we do a post to users, i.e. we're going to create a new user, then it's going to call this, and we'll create a new user straight with the body of the post, right? Where we parse out the body params from the request, which came in the context, right? So there's the context, the ring request context. And then we'll do a redirect, and again, here's that location, and then we format it to a particular location, blah, 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 users 1 or whatever, based on the request context and the ID. So that's pretty straightforward. And then if we want a particular user, it's pretty much the straight resource syntax. We request a user :X, pass in X, and then we do a resource get, again, using the API key, do a get, and then we query the user, and if the user is there, then we return struct with his ID, and then we return the ID, right? So that one's pretty simple. And we've got the same kind of thing with games. So up here, we return all the games. And notice how clean it is. Get, API key, immediate types, games for users. All these are functions that we've defined up above. We'll see those in a second. But in this particular case, we didn't define the functions inline like we did down here. We made them separate. So this looks really nice and clean right here. Whereas this one is, while you're exploring and figuring it out, you can do them right there and put them inline and then, refactor them out, something like that, right? So same kind of idea. And then up here is the nice clean, here's our standard media types that we support, just a vector of them. Get the API key out of the context. So we say, pass in the context, then we do get in the context, give us the request, give us the params out of the request, and give us the API key out of the params. And then assign that. And notice, nice and clean, how we do this in a win-let, win-let. So it just decomposes. If the first one fails, we just exit out with a null. If the second one fails, we exit out with a null, right? And then finally we get down to associate into the context. In this particular case, we're adding the user into the context at the user key because they're authorized. Because they're authorized, we're going to take that ring request context and put the user in there so that he can be used later on in these. We know he's valid, right? So he's authorized, and then later on we could check that other thing, is he allowed? Like maybe he's not allowed to see the users, but only the scores, something like that, right? And then if we were doing that, we would have, down here, we would have a check for allowed question mark that would call that function. So you could do really flexible and nice and clean code. Anyway, here's another one where we're checking if a game exists, the games for a particular user, scores for a particular game, and then parse the score out or just get the long, right? So that's pretty much the example. That 2 resources in one short file with like 12 functions total. It's not very big. And so we have a particular server running, and it's running on port 300. And you can see.
You increase the font size.
Yeah. Let me scroll it up. See. Okay. So in this case, we did the HTTP call to the API for games I pass in the API key for my user, right? And I just generated users with random keys. So I looked in the database to see what the key was and attached it. And then we got back HTML, right? Straight from there, that was it. So that was that one resource call. We didn't specify what media type we wanted or anything. It just defaulted, right? And so literally we can take this short thing. I mean, even if you only want games, let's say that's your one API. That's all you're going to define with those helper functions. And odds are half of those helper functions that you're gonna define up here, the core part of these things are going to be functions you're using in the other part of your app somewhere anyway to query scores for displaying the HTML page anyway, right? It's just this little extra stuff of grabbing stuff out of the request that is going to be different. And even if you look at that, if you don't let, like a lot of APIs are read-only. If you really look at this and they're read-only and you don't support post, right? I mean, it's still shorter than like some scripts you're going to write to do a build, right? I mean, it's ridiculously short. It's shorter than your chef scripts might be, right? To deploy your servers or something. So, I mean, to me, that was like totally huge. I was like, this is so awesome, right? I can specify something super, super easy. It's nice and clean, and it just worked, right? It was just totally nice. And then, I mean, I wasn't originally using Lighttable to play with it, and Norman showed me the latest Lighttable stuff before I had seen it, and it was like, I started playing around with it, and you can do what he showed you, where you try it out and you see the result right there, right? I don't remember all the key bindings right now, or I'd show you in line. I normally play with this, and this is actually one of what I was working on when I originally was learning how to do it, which is much uglier. And you can see I had lots of comments and stuff. Before I found the trace, I was putting debug in there and stuff like that, so it's much uglier, right? But it did work, right? I mean, literally, the first thing I did, I got it to work, even though parts of it weren't as clean and stuff because I wasn't completely understanding. It worked. And you know, when you're sitting down with a new library and stuff, that's half the challenge. If you get frustrated that it's just not working. And that was like huge for me, it worked. So,
what are you using for authorization? I see you have for auth. Let's see, LJ.
In my example?
Yeah.
What are you talking about?
I see there under routes, auth.clj, just two above your home CLJ. On the left, yeah, there, two up.
That's something that's created by Luminous, right?
Yeah, that's created by Luminous. This one,
I see.
right here. And to put a plug-in for Luminous, if you haven't checked out Luminous as a little web project, it tries to not dictate to you what libraries you're going to use, but it kind of gives you a conglomeration of stuff that's kind of not tightly coupled together. Like if you want a different templating thing, you can swap a different templating thing in. But it creates projects that get you going real good with the database stuff in there. If you want Clojure script already integrated and your templating stuff. And it creates a little structure like this with the views, the routes, the models, source CLJS, test directory, and a project CLJ all automatically, right? Like I defined my DB over here. I had some simple users and location. And then I also had the database. And then I used, to test stuff out, I also tested it with raw JDBC because I wasn't sure I was going to trust Kona. But anyway, check out Luminous as a library. And I'll also put another plugin mainly because A, it was good, but I also help review the book. The web programming Clojure book from Pragmatic Programmers is finally out in print now. And it's pretty good getting started. You start with Lighttable, and you go through and you build a little photo viewer app. And you don't use Luminous Web Project to start with. You start with just the raw libraries. And then by the time you're done, you've used Clojure script, JavaScript, the REPL, database access layers, and you've built the whole thing step by step in the end. And only like at the very last chapter, and kind of where can you go from here, does even mention that he is the main guy behind Luminous.
Yep.
So check that out if you're interested in Clojure web stuff. It's a nice little beginner thing.
Have you had any experience with Pedestal? How does it compare?
I haven't. When Pedestal first came out, I looked at the docs and I was just like, okay, I understand part of the docs, but there weren't enough tutorials and stuff, so I just said, screw it. I haven't looked at it since, to be honest with you. I mean, I listened to the podcast where they talked about it like 2 months ago again, and I like the idea it's supposed to be data flow and some stuff like that, but it's still, I still haven't had time to dive into it.
It's pretty big, and it's targeted at building a very specific app.
Single page web app.
Yeah. So, you know, if you're just looking to throw something up quickly, is way more than you want to do that. But if you have a spare 8 hours in the weekend, you can run through the tutorial.
That being said, that reminds me, on the Planet Clojure, there was a guy going through it, and he was keeping meticulous notes, and he's done a couple of blog posts about what he experienced as he was working through example 1, example 2, and stuff like that. So check those out too, because it's always good to get, you know, people who are suffering through it and write their notes down. It's like,
Well, they fixed a lot of the bugs. You know, when it first came out, there was a lot of bugs in the tutorial.
gotcha.
They fixed a lot of those.
Yeah, I didn't even do the tutorial. I just read the docs and I was like, okay, this is going to take more commitment than I have time for.
If someone would like to volunteer to answer that question by going through the tutorial and giving a talk,
Yeah, there you go.
it is something we've had requested many times. So you don't have to be an you don't have to be an expert. You just have to be willing to investigate and give us.
It sounds like it's going to change quite considerably with 3.0. So probably want to wait till after that one comes out.
I'm just putting that out there. It is a topic that that we would very much like to talk on.
Yeah.
So.
And again, volunteer to give a talk. Even little short ones are awesome every time, because the more libraries we get exposed to from each other, the better off I think we all are and stuff. So, I mean, like this one, I mean, I literally just wanted to do something for another demo I was doing, and I didn't want to jack around with, you know, regular Java, and I didn't want to play with the Ruby stuff and see what was new since the last time I looked at it. And I was like, oh, there's this Liberator thing. And then I read the doc and the examples were so small. I mean, literally the first example was the thing that, like, oh, if it's really that simple, resource, handle okay. I'm like, thank you, if it really can be that. And there's a little more, but not much more. And it really is that simple. And I mean, like right now I have a buddy who's like telling me Node.js all the time. I'm like, is it this short? Right. This is really short, and I get all the JVM, right? I get the Java world, I can cluster, I can run on a mutant. Do that with your Node.js, right? And so it's still a win for me, right?
Can you talk at all about the project, the prototype you did?
I can say a little bit. Gotcha. Yeah, the project I was working on was a prototype for somebody, and it was basically to have mobile phones sending data back real time. And I actually ran Liberator on a mutant, right? And the mutant's running at my house over my static IP that's out on the web. And it's been running for like a month with this phone just sending it data and stuff, right? And it literally, I already pulled it out, but it literally, my prototype was more about what the phone was doing, not what Clojure was doing, right? So the fact that I was able to stand up my 6 resource definitions, load them on to a mutant, and have that done and working, even though I didn't know the whole library and I made some mistakes, I had that done in like less than a day, and I was back on the mobile phone side, right? And Norman helped me fix some other issues with it, but the reality is that first day I was already users. And with Luminous, I was using the Luminous example. I had user registration, login, all that, and the data was coming back for individual phones, right? So this phone number was one, this phone number was another, and the data was separate, and they were stored in the database, and I could access them through the resources, right? And so even with Ruby on Rails, I never experienced quite that turnaround, right? And the fact that I didn't get tied up in having to define my views or anything because it just gave me back default HTML. It was ugly, but I showed the demo and here's all the data and it's in a table view in my browser. It's not styled or anything, but the person I was given the demo for, the prototype, literally was blown away because it happened so fast, right? And a big part of that's because of this library. A mutant was easy to deploy to, and Java just did what it was supposed to, right? And Clojure on top of that made it all much easier. So, I mean, it just helped me love Clojure and Lisp even more than the bigoted Clojure Lisp small talk kind of guy that I already was before. So that's about all I can tell you about the project. I can't tell you actually what it's doing, but it was sending lots of data from phones, right? Which everybody seems to be doing nowadays. So it's not, but it was all Clojure and a mutant. So.
For the NSA.
Yeah, for the NSA, that's right. Snooping as a bonus.
You're only pulling 20% of the population.
Yeah. But the reality was, I mean, literally, we've talked about a mutant before. We have Clojure, that's our group, right? But the reality of how quick and everything it turned around. And notice, I didn't mention the REPL, NREPL, any of that stuff. I use those too, but those were sidelined to how much power the libraries just gave me, right? These were the bonuses. I already had the other stuff and I was I'm used to that now, right? I just expect it. But when this just did what it was supposed to and a mutant did what it was supposed to again, it was just so much joy in doing the solution instead of slogging through writing Objective-C or on the Android phone, writing in Java and making all the runnables and all that other crap to get something to do what it was supposed to. Here, I just sat down and less than 10 hours later, I had what I needed and I was back to the slog of doing the phone stuff, right?
What kind of obstacles did you run into when you were learning how to use it?
Actually, I mean, literally, Liberator was simpler than the mistakes I made in Kona, right? Like getting the very first thing, I can't tell you, like I literally copied the example out of there for users and I just kept media types and handle OK, and handle OK did the query to the database. I mean, that's how simple it was. And I turned around in the original query to the database. I'll just show it to you. It's not in this project. The original query to the database wasn't the Korma stuff. It was the straight SQL stuff, right? Insert user. I deleted the one originally, but originally it was just straight this, right? Give me the user. And when I was inserting user, I created a helper function just to slam a date in the column. So, I mean, I actually had my first thing working in less than 45 minutes. It was when I started having to try and understand all the other keyword options and stuff, and it's been a long time, so I couldn't remember all the HTTP stuff, and I was like looking in the spec instead of looking at that graph, right? If you look at that graph, that makes using Liberator like so much easier, because I was like, okay, what the hell do they mean by is allowed? And I was looking at the HTTP spec, okay, is allowed. Let me find out what that means over here. I completely missed how important that graph was. So that would be the kind of the kicker. Look at that diagram and use the trace thing as you're learning it. Norman showed me the trace thing after I had already figured out a lot of stuff. Mm-hmm. But the trace thing just made it all the much easier. I was playing with it last night and it was just like, hot damn, I should have had this. I skipped over this whole section like how many times because I was looking for other stuff. I was like, eh.
Well,
that's why there's debug statements in my code.
Doing the kind of code review for you, what I noticed, what appeared, in critiquing Sam's original application, what seemed to be the hardest thing about Liberator to understand, from looking at the code from him, was what that context was and what to put into it, because the examples, they show you like the examples are really all over the map. They do things in like 5 or 6 different ways, and they don't really present a consistent view of what to do. Although the documentation on the website is great, I think the examples they have are they do things in like 3 or 4 different ways, and it's not really clear. So I tried to help Sam kind of go through and just sort of clean it up and do things in a very consistent way. And so hopefully it reads very, very cleanly and clearly compared to some of the examples he was showing from the website before, which if you look back at them now, you're like, well, it's doing like it's doing this way and this way, and it's kind of confusing. Why is it associating something into the context here and returning a new context here? Because it's doing like 3 or 4 different ways. And I think that,
that was a
looking
big
at the
deal.
code, that seemed to be the thing that was causing him the most confusion. So I'm guessing that's
So getting
really,
familiar with the context ideas.
well, and like understanding the usage patterns, because all the documentation is like really, really good, except for the code samples, because the code samples are they just do things in too many ways. They're not consistent.
It's not from one example, right, where you can see that it's like what he said, it's multiple examples. And I think the other deal is the guy who wrote it, he knows this stuff, seems like really, really well. So some things are probably obvious to him, right? So
well, one thing I think could be a problem is we were looking when I was looking at what he did for the demo here is that workflow, that REST workflow that he gives you is very fixed. You can't change the workflow, right? Those decision points are the decision points. So for instance, in the auth he's done here, the authentication happens one place, and if the authentication fails, it returns 403 or whatever, and it returns that decision, and then later it looks at the decisions, and there's no point later in that decision graph where you can change your mind and say, no, this was actually unauthorized, right? You can make other decisions. So like if on the get resource for get game number 1, right, or game by ID, if for example you read that and the resource that you have to, if you've already passed the authenticate part, you can't later say, oh, well, you're not the owner of the game, so you can't read it.
So you have to make like a separate service.
Well, you just have to, like there's a strict, so you just have to make that decision earlier in the in the thing. So there are some decisions made on that flow, which if you have a very, very particular way you want to do things, might mean that your code is not quite as elegant as you thought.
So do you also not have good control over like the return codes and the headers?
Well, you do for the decision points, right? So on the decision points, it does, and it's really, really smart. This is based on the Erlang web machine. So just to point out, Sam did say there wasn't something good like this in Ruby. There is a Ruby Ruby web machine. There's an implementation of that. Web machine has been kind of done in several languages, so I don't want to like.
what I meant is like clean and concise.
No, it actually looks a lot like this. Because they've all copied the Erlang stuff, which is where it comes
Understood, but it still wasn't clean.
Okay, well, I didn't know if you were saying that because you hadn't used it before.
No, I played with it before.
Okay.
Like originally I wasn't going to use Clojure because I still
I've
learning a
got
lot
issues
of it.
with Ruby web machine too, but I just didn't want to make it seem like we're just saying this is something only, and
No.
most of this does exist.
Yeah, originally I was going to use Ruby because I know Ruby better than Clojure, like from using it more. Because I've actually used it on the job. But I was like, this is still too ugly. I want to use Clojure. I had seen Liberator by then, and it just looked so much cleaner. But to Norman's point, these are the only 2 places you get to check. After you go buy that, you don't get to check anymore.
That's the fixed part of the workflow.
Yeah.
Yeah, this graph is totally fixed. Great.
And it's a really great workflow. It's really like, it is like, if you do
Thanks for
this, you're
coming.
gonna have a really good REST API, but like if you want to decide authenticated further down in the workflow, well, you can kind of hack it in. There are ways to hack it in, but you really start jumping out and you start hacking it instead of going within the flow. So that's the only other thing is like I could see some cases where maybe you might actually want a slightly different flow that still still does everything right, but just has a slightly different flow. And I think it's not extensible in that point. But if you fit into this normal flow, which I think almost everybody would, it's like
So here's the
simple.
whole graph, like laid out. Now it's all the decisions down here, and if I zoom in, but literally auth and is allowed are at the very top. So you need, to Norman's point, if you get down here and then you want to check is it allowed, too late, right? You need, and in some sense that mirrors HTTP requests in general. They want you to know, are you authorized and are you allowed to get a particular thing before they do any more work for you, right?
So is it doing authentication and not authorization? Like there's no hierarchy of who has access to what?
Yeah, I don't think of it that way because well, I mean, conceptually you can say that it allows for both of those because you've got your authorized, so authenticate, and then allow for can this person have access to this particular one, right? Like you're authorized to see games, but you can't see Qbert, right? But you have to make those decisions very early on because, and you can do that conceptually because you know what resource they're asking for.
Okay.
You can do the query because you can implement an allowed function. You know what they're requesting, do the query there and check on if it's Qbert or not, and then let them go. If you try and decide that later, it's too late, right? And to me, that's what you usually do in systems anyway. You try and check authorization and authentication as soon as possible because you don't want to do all the work if they're not allowed anyway. So, and I think, I haven't looked because, again, I'm not like a guru at this, but I would think some of that would play in with the caching a little bit too. But I haven't checked on that, if it plays into the E tag or not. Because like I said, I just wanted it to work for my one little example, and it did. So it's like, hot damn, right? But this graph is like, it really is straightforward to follow. After I finally looked at it, thanks to prodding, everything else started clicking into things, a lot better. And I mean, I think the other thing I thought of this last night is if you're just now learning HTTP, this is like the great tool to sit down and learn HTTP and how HTTP works. Because you can change your request type and you can intercept basically every one of the things that HTTP wants you to deal with. They're all kind of described in this graph. So it's like nice. I was thinking about that. And then with light table, like Norma was showing, if you define something and just try and hit it with the curl command and you can just see it all right there. It's like a awesome way to play. Cool. So anyway, check it out. It's good stuff. Support the community.
Yeah, I think if we had asked for what the font or something, I mean, that would have been, would have made those API calls a little bit more straightforward. Not as jumbled as our code base was for that, right?
Cool. We should factor it.
Yeah, liberate yourself.
Resources is a big part. Why do you think that? Or
For what?
the fact that it's based around resources is a big part of it.
Well, if you're doing an API
compared to say Composure.
Well, yeah. So where I work, we have an API, and we've done all of this by hand, right? Which means on every request, well, of course, we put in our own authentication around it, but that's sort of a wrapper. But for every request, we have to check we have to make all of these decisions in there. What content type do we return? And if we want to add caching into it. Well, in order for us to add caching, we either have to have like some really complex wrapper around all of this, which doesn't understand what's going on inside of it, like calculating an E tag or a last modified. You need to know what's in the resource. You can't really wrap something easily and put it around there unless you put it way like on the front end of it's completely outside of your app, right? And so, but for us to do that, we're going to go through here, do this in several places. Here, you can just put in you just put in for each resource. It's a keyword and how to compute your E tag or how to compute your last modified, and then suddenly you handle all of your caching negotiation. Right there, and it just sort of works, and it's a really clean way to do that. If you're going to do it in a sort of a RESTful way. Now, if you want to do your API in another style, not in the REST style, you need another style. Liberator's not
it's
not
really
a great choice.
It's really targeted towards REST. That said, one thing I forgot to mention: the guy who wrote it did he did a Clojure talk at was it Clojure Con last fall?
It's on InfoQ.
Yeah, and it's on InfoQ. So if you really want to get the word from the horse's mouth, watch it there. He explains it pretty good too. So, anybody else got any more inputs?
Thank you.
Thanks for coming. I was going to say I got one of the Clojure emails I get today. Somebody's actually doing the Clojure equivalent of the Ruby book that Y did. So check that out. I'll probably post a link to it, to the discussion or to the email of the group. And then somebody's doing Hitchhiker's Guide to Clojure or Clojure Galaxy or something like that, kind of in a similar vein. So I'll probably send both of those out. And, you know, I think it would be pretty cool if the Clojure community gets kind of something that's kind of as wacky and zany as that stuff was. So, and Clojure would kind of just maybe get more people excited who see it not as just a bunch of Lisp heads with parentheses. So, anyway, thanks for coming.
Thank you.
Really begging, come next month for South by Southwest. I know it's gonna be crowded and all that, but I think it's a big deal. The Capital Factory is really, you know, giving us an option to have our meeting during that week, because I'm sure they're getting lots and lots of people who want the space. So bring all your friends.
Learn the architecture talk,
Right.
and then we're looking for a Clojure talk to pair with it. Since
Right.
that's like it's related to things you do in Clojure, but it's not, that talk won't have any specific Clojure content. But it will be very interesting.
Right, and promote it as much as you can to everybody you know who might be here for South by Southwest or who's even in town. I think it's another time to reach out to other programmers, other languages too. Thanks again for coming.
Thank you.
We usually meet downstairs in a little bar area for some kibitzing if you want to join us there for a little while. But we just rant and rave, and yeah, I talk about small talk sometimes. So. Sometimes, yeah.